Welcome back to the podcast. I have a first time guest, and as always, I want to know your origin story. This is Amit Tishler. Tell me your origin story. We got you into comic books to make you a lifelong fan.
I started my career as a production artist. I used to be an animator for TV and for games. And if anybody in traditional animation, comics is, at least from my experience, almost always the starting point. Because when you are the kid sitting in the back of the classroom drawing instead of listening to whatever the teacher has to say, you're not a filmmaker yet, but you have a skill, right? You're like, hey, I can draw better than other people. Oh my God, I love doing this. And that's the first touch point for you to actually do more, not just drawing random things, but trying to tell stories. And comics is the first medium that both inspires you to do it and the one that you start practicing because it is feasible, because it's something you can actually execute on. I became a comic fan pretty early in life, both animation and comics. In general, both on a professional level and on a consumer level, I am a multimedia person, meaning I'm a fan of TV, like animation in particular, film, video games, and of course, comic books. I am immersed by everything and I wear it on my sleeve quite literally. So I think comics for me was a big passion point also because where I grew up, scarcity. There wasn't a lot of it. Now there's comic book stores back in Tel Aviv, but back in the day, you had to actually journey to get a new issue of Uncanny X-Men in the 90s. So there was also a component of just like, I am part of a very small community that I know very few people are interested in. So there's a sense of ownership and excitement that was always tied into that. Later on, professionally, I went into animation. So that was the starting point of me in production. But even throughout all of my years going between animation, video games, new media, comics was always something that I loved and consumed to some extent, and always something that I was interested in practicing in and have on multiple occasions. Where that became the focus came pretty late. Once again, because I just had a very bizarre career path of like production artist, startup co-founder, essentially creative director for interactive entertainment, software designer. So I went through so many different periods of things, opportunities that kind of dragged me along the way and added to my skill set. But comics never went away. And eventually, my focus was always, hey, I want to tell my own stories. I want to create my own things. And I've gotten shows optioned before, but TV is also such a difficult beast to wrangle. Like, in terms of, hey, even if you manage to sell something or get it optioned, that doesn't mean it's going to get made. And an opportunity eventually showed up for me to get back into my original content creation after me and my co-founder sold our company. And I went, you know what? Back to foundation, back to origins. And that strategy ended up working really well. And I've been keeping at it ever since.
I want to know,
Yeah.
how did your upbringing in Israel shape your artistic voice? How does that impact you now?
That is a very complicated question that I'm not even sure what's the best way to answer that. Because I feel like no matter what, it is unavoidable that your own personal history or your family's history is going to impact your storytelling, whether you think it will or not. I don't consider myself like I'm someone who's very opposed to, and Edenfrost, my debut book, very much talks about this, which directly correlates to what I'm about to say. I am very opposed to any form of tribalism or tribalistic thinking. And that also means that, I the idea of identity being dictated or you dictating your identity by something that you haven't earned or something that you are not controlling or something that isn't really yours has always weirded me out, right? It's not that it doesn't impact what your identity is, but for me, my point of pride as a storyteller, as a person was always, this is who I am despite or outside of all of these things. So I think it did give me a very wide range in terms of my approach to writing because I never tried to force things to my past in order to say, this is part of my identity, so I have to. I feel pressured to do X, Y, and Z or to tell story. I just don't like that inherently. I'm not saying it's wrong to do. I personally, as a creator, I would feel lazy to do it in a sense. So I only tell stories that I'm interested in telling. I'm only telling stories about characters that I feel like I can connect to for good or bad to some extent, characters that I can understand, and I want it to be as universal and global as possible. But I think despite all of that, it doesn't really matter, right? My own opinions, my own drivers, like any friction that I've had as my in my life, where I was born, my immigrant story, moving to the States, like all of that definitely shaped who I am. So, but I do think that to a certain extent, I don't try to actively harness it. I just let it flow in what I want to say, if that makes sense.
Totally. So tell the fans a little bit about Eden Frost and how you wound up doing it at Mad Cave.
Yeah. So Eden Frost was a concept. It's funny. You've been in this industry and business long enough to know that production cycles and then distribution and release dates don't necessarily align. So Eden Frost was not the first title that I have written or worked on a publisher with, work with a publisher on. It was the first one to come out. Stomping Grounds, that is currently having an active Kickstarter, Stomping Grounds was actually the first one that me and Elliot started working with a publisher on. Edenfrost was, at that point, I was multiple publishing deals in. It just so happens that Mad Cave is very efficient in their process. There's something that I want to say, there's a statement that drives me, and I find an interesting mechanism to comment about it. And again, it's tied to my own exposure to things that I feel like I have a say on or want to talk about. And Edenfrost was unique because I usually keep my own, let's say, family history or origins. I keep it from being directly tied to my storytelling. It's not super conscious or not conscious. It's just something that I tend not to do because I do like to delve into things that are more fantastical. Edenfrost was an exception, and it's because I had something to say about identity, because I think this was also written in a time where we certainly haven't, it hasn't stopped since, unfortunately, it's only escalated. But the statement that drove Edenfrost was about the weaponization of identity and how using one's identity, like the identity is a construct, and that weaponizing it can be used to essentially hurt or target any group of people. And that label is arbitrary and extremely malleable, meaning that it is one of the most dangerous philosophical and mental tools that not just hostile regimes, but also individuals can use in order to inflict harm on others, in order to drive prejudice, and even in order to empower themselves. And this is, I feel, a bipartisan issue to a certain extent and something that everybody should care about. When I wanted to tackle this, of course, I always like fantasy and I like sci-fi, and it's something that I want to instill into everything that I do. So I was looking for a fun way to tell this story, also without being preachy. And the honest truth is the easiest way to do it was actually going back to family history. All of my family are Holocaust survivors, so these are the stories and the trauma that has been passed on that I am very aware of. And it's something that I wanted to do with also my own agenda in mind, because for anybody who reads Eden Frost, I think something comes up. If you look at it closely, a few things come up very quickly that are very personal to me, which is it's not a religious story. I've seen a few people, like reviewers and stuff, really try to find religious elements in it, but the truth is, the way that I developed it, there's a reason why the characters are not religious. It's because the philosophy of who they are and what's happening to them. This is happening not during a Holocaust. It's a Russian Civil War story, which at the time I felt was a much closer equivalent in terms of political trends and social trends than World War II, which we just use as a go-to for whatever. This feels bad, ergo World War II, ergo Hitler. It's kind of lazy. And I feel like World War One is a lot more fragmented, and it was a testing ground for a lot of what happened later. So I picked that as the topic, the pogroms, the battle between the Red Army and the White Army, and the place of the Jewish people of Eastern Europe during that time. And to really anchor this, a lot of the people in these communities that were not religious, they were just like, hey, we're Ukrainian. Hey, we're Polish. And all of a sudden you're told you are the other, and it has nothing that you say, doesn't matter how you behave. It's for us to determine, which is a big part of all of the character journeys in Edenfrost. It's the idea of it doesn't matter what you think your identity is, or whatever you want to define yourself is as, because in the end, what's going to define how this affects you is how other people perceive you and what they choose to do with it. So that was the core, and that's what formed essentially the entire concept of Edenfrost as a book.
So I have a two-part question. The first part is what type of fan would enjoy Eden Frost? And for people who, most of them out there who are superhero centric in their reading, why should they give it a chance?
Look, so first I'll give you a general setup of what the story is about, right? So Edenfrost essentially tells the story of two kids, Alex and Yuli Lowe, who are trying to survive through the Russian Civil War using the mystical power of a very unique interpretation of what a golem is. And this also transitions into who would like this story. Obviously, anybody who likes historical fantasy, absolutely. The vibe, the visual fidelity that Bruno Frenda brought to the table, the entire tone of it is very inspired by things like Attack on Titan and Full Metal Alchemist. It's very much in that vibe, right? So it's not a manga, but it's very manga inspired, manga and anime inspired. So if you're into that kind of very intense, sometimes dark, but very emotionally entrenched and thoughtful storytelling, it's not a superhero story, but it is a powerful one, and it's very relentless and also not preachy, right? Which was a very important thing to me. I wanted to make it very character driven. I don't want to drive my message home. I want it to be an exciting journey. So first and foremost, it's just an exciting, very character driven journey. But I did build a unique magic system for it. I created my own idea of what a golem could function that we only see the output of, which is not what people are used to. And it's something that I usually don't. If you're thinking, oh, just big rocky giant, you're a little far off. There's a lot more to it, and it gets very interesting. So if you're into that kind of historical fantasy that doesn't handhold you, that doesn't focus too much on exposition, that really focuses on both the thrill and the action and the tragedy and the emotion of that kind of intense, harrowing journey, this is definitely for you.
So tell the fans about the artist and how much contribution did he have to the overall project?
Bruno Frenda is a legend. I think this was one of his earliest projects. This is one of the most beautiful books I think that I've ever gotten the honor of publishing. Bruno is incredible when it comes down to both how he elevated the existing character designs, because there was a lot of development that already went into it when I went into the project, and I tend to be in how I write my scripts, in how I design my art guides, I tend to be extremely specific. He didn't have to iterate much. He didn't have to contribute anything to the storytelling, right? He had very direct instructions, but the quality and the way that he frames drama is simply spot on. And it was one of those things where Mad Cave gave me a list of artists that are like, hey, we are thinking these would be people that are really good for the project. And I remember browsing through, and they're all fantastic. When I saw his work, one of the things that popped to me, I was just like, this guy gets me, and we have a lot of the same sources of inspiration. That was extremely important. He even had a Full Metal Alchemist fan art that was just absolutely gorgeous. I'm like, this is a guy who likes a lot of the same stuff, and it's a guy who knows how to build very strong scenes, very strong expressions. He knows how to instill emotion into both character and scene. And he's also the full package. We're talking like anything from sketch to color. He is a one-man army. So it was very comfortable for us to work together because there was an immediate sync of like when I described to him a scene and I even use a reference, he not only sees the image and goes, okay, you want something like this. He's very likely already experienced that scene in the same way. And he goes, I get what you want the audience to feel. And that's where he just iterates in an incredible way. And it creates really powerful moments in this book that are both emotionally written and just visually striking.
So a lot of fans will take Mad Cave and group it in there with the other type of publishers like Boom and Oni and Dynamite. But Mad Cave is really quite a different publisher. Wouldn't you agree and explain that to fans?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. Look, they're a relatively newer publisher in the scene, and they're not afraid to experiment, right? They just try a lot of things. And I know that one of Mark London's philosophies is that he wants to have content for everyone. If you like manga, you will have manga. If you want horror, you will have horror. That's his vision of what the company is. What it means for creators is that they're just very open, especially at the time when we went in, very open to trying a lot of very unique things. So you just end up having a pretty diverse collection of works from very different voices. And that creates a very unique catalog that I feel like is so fresh in today's landscape because they do give you a lot of support when you're essentially doing a grand storytelling experiment and somebody needs to take a bet on you. They have done that multiple times, which is not common because it is a very risk-adverse industry. So having a publisher that is willing to take creative risks and logistical risks, rare. So they are an important anomaly in this industry nowadays.
How do you balance between doing the humor stuff and being more serious? And how do you approach that as a creator?
That's it. See, like that's another weird but good question. I think like sometimes I write solo, sometimes it's me and Elliot Sperl working together on some titles. I know that my tendency in general, I can do both because my range is pretty wide and I try as much as possible to never pigeonhole myself. Because I feel I've been working in entertainment for like, what, more than 15 years now. But as a creator, I'm still pretty new. I'm evergreen, right? My titles only started coming out 2 years ago, and there's a lot more coming in the future. So, in a sense, I haven't been pigeonholed by my own work yet. So, that really gives me room to try everything. And that's something that I'm very adamant on doing. I think inherently, as a creator, pretty dark. I have a tendency to gravitate towards very heavy stories and very tragic ones and with a lot of darkness, despite me in real life being a complete goofball. But no matter what, in the end, when you're trying to tell a story, you need to think about what's the best mechanism to use it. And if you're trying to, again, convey a message or a theme, which is always at the core of everything that I want to do, sometimes the right way to go is just play it up straight with drama. Sometimes comedy is actually a much better way to do it. So to me, it's always that kind of very, I don't know, like almost like mechanical decision-making process that forces me to go, what is its form follows function? What is the best way that this message can be conveyed and this story can be told? And it has to be beyond your comfort zone. It has to be what's actually better for the story you're trying to produce. That just forces me to constantly be on my toes and try different things. In the end, even when you're reading comedic work that I write, you're still going to see the bittersweetness on it. That I feel is across the board in all of my work. There is always a hint of bittersweetness and a hint of uncertainty. I'm not a big fan of the idea of closure because I think that's a fallacy that can be extremely harmful. So my opinions, my sensibilities, my own voice definitely sips into everything that I do, whether it's comedy or not. But as far as how it's written or the genre that it's in, that can go anywhere.
Amit Tishler from Edenfrost from Mad Cave Studios. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for joining me on the show.
Thank you so much.